He was the Marble Duke, a man carved from duty and ice, his heart as cold as the ballroom floor. She was his perfect, polished bride-to-be, the diamond chosen to secure his legacy. But perfection is a fragile mask. On the night of their engagement ball, the Duke stepped behind a marble pillar, seeking only a moment of silence. Instead, he found a whisper. What he overheard was not the idle gossip of the ton, but a venomous secret that shattered his world, unraveled his future, and undid the very man he thought he was. The grand ballroom of Whitfield House blazed with the light of 1,000 candles, each flame reflecting in the polished marble floors and the glittering jewels of the ton. This was London in its high season, an apex of industry and empire, and tonight the apex of London society was here. They were all here for him, for Duke Alaric Whitfield. Alaric stood near the grand staircase, a figure of imposing, frigid perfection. He was tall, with dark hair, and eyes so pale a blue they seemed almost grey, like a winter sky. He was known in drawing rooms and smoking clubs as the Marble Duke, a title earned not just for his family's vast quarries, but for his own impenetrable demeanour. He did not smile. He inclined his head. He did not laugh. He offered a dry, clipped observation. Tonight he was observing his own engagement ball, and he was suffocating. He was marrying Lady Genevieve Sutton. It was a good match. The Suttons were old blood, their lands bordering his own in the north. The alliance would solidify his power, quiet the whispers about his late father's aggressive business dealings, and most importantly, provide an heir. His eyes found her across the room. She was magnificent. Clad in a gown of ivory silk that seemed to glow, she was a vision of aristocratic grace. She was laughing with his best friend, Lord Robert Langley, her head tilted just so, the picture of demure charm. She was, by all accounts, flawless. And Alaric felt nothing but the crushing weight of duty. This was his life, a performance, a contract, a legacy to be maintained. A string quartet began a new waltz. He knew he should claim his fiancée, to dance the dance of the happy couple. But the air was too thick, the scent of tuberoses and perfume too cloying. He needed a moment. Turning from the throng, he slipped through a heavy velvet curtain into the adjoining conservatory. It was cooler here, the air damp and smelling of earth and jasmine. Moonlight streamed through the glass ceiling, painting the tessellated floor in silver and black. He walked past towering ferns and citrus trees, seeking the farthest, darkest corner. He found it near a trio of towering marble pillars that supported the conservatory's dome. He leaned against the cool stone, the thrum of the music a dull pulse through his back, and closed his eyes. He was not alone for long. Voices, low and urgent, drifted from the other side of the pillar. He froze. It was considered the height of dishonour to eavesdrop, but he was too weary to move to announce himself. "Must be careful. The Dowager Duchess watches you," said an older, flinty voice. Alaric recognized it as Mrs. Helen Pike, Lady Genevieve's chaperone and aunt. "The Dowager is a relic," a second voice replied. The voice was smooth, clear, and cold, a voice he recognized instantly. It was his bride, Lady Genevieve. But this was not the soft, charming tone she used in the ballroom. This was steel. "She is a relic that holds power," Mrs. Pike hissed. "You are so close. Do not let sentimentality ruin it now." "Sentimentality?" Genevieve let out a short, sharp laugh that held no humour. "Do not mistake my performance for feeling, Helen. I feel nothing for him, but the same contempt I feel for this entire house. He is his father's son, cold, arrogant, and blind." Alaric's blood chilled. He stood paralyzed, his back pressed flat against the stone. "He suspects nothing," Genevieve continued, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that carried perfectly in the quiet air. "The fool Duke believes I am Lady Genevieve Sutton, the perfectly bred, empty-headed doll. He has no idea he's marrying a ghost." "A ghost?" What did she mean? "He has no idea," she said, her voice vibrating with a sudden, venomous passion that terrified him, "that he has just invited Annalise Beaufort into his home." The name struck Alaric like a physical blow. Beaufort. Thomas Beaufort, his father's old partner, the man who had... "His father destroyed mine," Annalise, Genevieve, spat. "Thomas Beaufort was a good man, a trusting man, and the elder Whitfield ruined him. He bankrupted him, stole his patents, and drove him to a pauper's grave. He murdered my father in all but name." Mrs. Pike shushed her. "Quiet. Not here." "I will be quiet in his ballroom," Annalise retorted. "But not with you. I have waited 15 years. I have erased myself, learned to walk, to talk, to be this Sutton creature. I have swallowed my rage until it has become a part of my blood. And now I am here. The wedding is in 2 weeks. Once I am the Duchess of Whitfield, I will have access to everything. The ledgers, the legal files, the accounts. His father built an empire on theft. I will use that same empire to tear his son down, piece by rotten piece." Alaric could not breathe. The world, which had been so solid and predictable, tilted on its axis. This woman, this creature, she was not the solution to his problems. She was the judgment. "And the Duke?" Mrs. Pike asked. There was a pause. When Annalise spoke again, her voice was the coldest thing Alaric had ever heard. "He will be the last to fall. He will stand amidst the wreckage of the Whitfield name, just as I stood amidst the wreckage of my father's study. It is karmic." A servant's footfall sounded nearby. "We must return," Mrs. Pike urged. Yes, the performance must continue. Alaric heard the rustle of silk as they moved away. He remained pressed against the pillar, his heart hammering against his ribs, a cold sweat on his brow. He was undone. The marble Duke was a facade, but it was one he understood. This was a chasm opening beneath his feet. The woman he was to marry was an impostor, a brilliant, patient, hate-filled stranger whose life's work was his complete and utter destruction. He pushed off the pillar, his legs unsteady. He looked at his hands. They were trembling. He, who had never trembled in his life, he was trapped. If he exposed her, the scandal would be catastrophic. A duke, duped by an impostor? His family's name would be a laughingstock. And worse, a small, terrible part of him registered the truth in her words. He knew his father had been a ruthless man. He had 2 weeks until the wedding. 2 weeks to fight a war he didn't know he was in, against an enemy who was already inside his gates. He straightened his waistcoat, the simple action requiring Herculean effort. He smoothed his features back into the familiar, cold mask. He was Alaric Whitfield. He was the Duke, and he would not be undone by a whisper. He stepped back into the ballroom, the candlelight blinding. His eyes found her, his bride, Annalise. She was smiling at his mother, the perfect picture of innocence. He began to walk toward her, his steps measured, and even on the marble floor. The game, he realized, was not hers to play alone. The next 3 days were a masterclass in polite torture. Alaric moved through the endless prenuptial obligations, dinners, fittings, viewings of the family jewels, with a chilling, heightened awareness. Every smile from Genevieve was a declaration of war. Every polite inquiry was a strategic maneuver. He was now playing the same game she was, and he was terrified to find she was, perhaps, better at it. He could not expose her. The scandal was untenable. He couldn't risk the Whitfield name being dragged through the mud of Beaufort versus Whitfield again. The old scandal had been contained, buried under his father's immense wealth. To resurrect it now, tied to his own wedding, would be ruinous. He was trapped. He would have to marry her. The realization settled on him like a shroud. He would knowingly, willingly, walk down the aisle and bind himself to a woman whose sole purpose was to destroy him. "You seem pensive, Your Grace," she said. They were in the Whitfield library, a cavernous room smelling of old leather and beeswax. She was ostensibly reviewing the guest list for the wedding breakfast. Alaric looked up from the estate papers he was pretending to read. He studied her. Not as his bride, but as his enemy, Annalise Beaufort. She was truly beautiful, but it was a severe, intelligent beauty. Her eyes, a deep shade of hazel, were sharp, observant. He had mistaken her intelligence for mere accomplishment. A fatal error. "I am a duke, Lady Genevieve," he replied, his voice level. "Pensive is my default state. I am simply considering the future, the long-term viability of our combined estates." She gave him a small, perfect smile. "I am certain the Whitfield and Sutton interests will merge beautifully. I have a keen mind for figures, you know. I look forward to assisting you with the burdens of the estate." He heard the threat plain as day. "I look forward to getting into your ledgers." "I'm sure you do," he said, allowing a thin sliver of ice to enter his tone. "My father, as you may know, was a master of figures. He could make them do remarkable things." Her smile did not waver, but he saw a flicker, a tightening around her eyes. He had scored a hit. "So I have heard," she murmured. "A formidable legacy to uphold." "Or to atone for," he said, rising from his chair. He walked to the window, staring out at the manicured London garden. "Tell me, my lady, do you believe the sins of the father should be visited upon the son?" He heard her sharp, quiet intake of breath. He had her off balance. "I believe," she said, her voice measured, "that a son who profits from those sins becomes a part of them. Does he not?" He turned to face her. "An interesting theological position. I am not speaking of theology, Your Grace. I am speaking of debts. All debts, in the end, must be paid." The air in the room was so taut it felt as if it might shatter. This was their new language, a dance of subtext and veiled threats. He felt a strange, dark thrill. He had spent his life surrounded by sycophants and dullards. Here, finally, was an opponent worthy of the name. And he was about to marry her. "Then we must ensure all accounts are settled," he said. He walked back to the desk and signed the paper in front of him with a flourish. "I would not want any outstanding debts to mar our union." That afternoon, Alaric summoned his family's solicitor, Mr. Gregory Shaw, to his private study. Shaw was a dry, precise man in his late 60s, who had served Alaric's father and now served him. He was discreet to a fault. "Mr. Shaw," Alaric said, foregoing any pleasantries, "I have 2 tasks for you. They are of the utmost urgency and require absolute, unshakable discretion. What I am about to say doesn't leave this room. Not even a whisper to your clerks." Shaw's bushy grey eyebrows rose a fraction. "Your Grace, you have my word." "First," Alaric said, pacing the room, "I want you to find everything you can on a man named Thomas Beaufort. He was an associate of my father's, some 20 years ago. I want the details of their partnership and the details of its dissolution. Everything. Shaw's expression remained impassive, but his eyes sharpened. "Beaufort," he repeated. "A messy affair, as I recall. It will be difficult. Many of those papers were sealed by your father." "Unseal them," Alaric commanded. "Second, and this is the more delicate matter, I want you to investigate the Sutton family." "Lady Genevieve?" Shaw asked, startled. "Not her directly. I want to know about her family, her background, where she was educated, who her physicians are, who her companions have been for the past 5 years. I want to know, for instance, if a Mrs. Helen Pike is, in fact, her aunt." Shaw was now visibly alarmed. "Your Grace, to investigate your own intended, this is highly irregular. May I ask the nature of your concern?" Alaric stopped pacing and fixed the solicitor with a look as hard as granite. "Your job, Mr. Shaw, is not to ask the nature of my concern. It is to alleviate it. You have 1 week. Spare no expense. Use any agent you must. I want to know who I am marrying." The solicitor, cowed by the Duke's sudden and terrifying intensity, nodded sharply. "1 week, Your Grace. It will be done." When Shaw had gone, Alaric sat at his desk for a long time. He was engaging in espionage against his own fiancée. He was planning a marriage that was, in truth, a Cold War. His mother, the Dowager Duchess Rowena, entered without knocking. She was a formidable woman, corseted in black bombazine, her silver hair coiled tightly. "Alaric, you missed the appointment with the bishop," she said, her voice crisp. "I was detained." Rowena sniffed. "You have been detained frequently this week. You look unwell. It is this marriage. It is happening too quickly." "The marriage is suitable," Alaric said, reciting the line he had been told his whole life. "Suitable," she scoffed. "That girl, she is too perfect. It is unnerving. She never falters. She never says the wrong thing. A woman without flaws is a woman with a great many secrets." Alaric looked at his mother, truly seeing her for the first time in years. He had dismissed her as a creature of routine and social rules. He saw now that she possessed a shrewd, reptilian observation. "What do you know about Thomas Beaufort?" he asked, the question abrupt. His mother's hand, which had been adjusting a porcelain figurine, froze. "That," she said, her back to him, "is a name I haven't heard in many years. A sad story." "What story?" "Your father was a brilliant man, Alaric, but he was ruthless. He believed in winning. He did not care what it cost others. Beaufort was his partner. They built the shipping lines together. Beaufort was the inventor. Your father was the financier. And in the end, your father had the financing, and Mr. Beaufort had nothing. And he killed himself," Alaric stated. His mother turned. Her face was pale. "Yes, he shot himself. In his study. He left a wife and a young daughter. They disappeared. Vanished. It was a tragedy. But it was business. That is what your father told me. It was business." "And you believed him?" Alaric asked, his voice raw. "I believed," the Dowager said, "that it was my duty to not ask questions. A duty you would do well to remember, Alaric. Some doors are best left sealed, especially those your father locked." She swept from the room, leaving Alaric alone with the ghosts. He now had confirmation. Annalise Beaufort's grievance was not imagined. It was real. He was marrying a woman whose father, his own father, had, by all accounts, driven to suicide. "A debt," he whispered to the empty room. She said all debts must be paid. He realized with a horrifying clarity that his goal was no longer to win against her. His goal was to survive. The week that followed was a descent into a private hell. Outwardly, Alaric was the picture of the dutiful fiancé. He and Genevieve rode in the park, their posture perfect, their polite conversation the envy of the ton. They attended the opera, sitting side by side in the Whitfield box, a handsome, cold couple carved from the same privileged stone. Inwardly, Alaric was a man besieged. He watched her. He listened. He analyzed her every word, her every fleeting expression. He saw now what his mother meant. Her perfection was a shield. She was an actress, playing the role of a lifetime, and her stage was his life. Annalise, for her part, felt the shift in him. The marble duke was no longer just cold. He was sharp. He was watchful. She had expected a dull, arrogant man, easy to manipulate. She had found something far more dangerous, an intelligent man who was listening. His questions were like surgical probes. "Your aunt, Mrs. Pike," he'd said over dinner. "She seems more of a confidant than a relative. You are very close." Annalise had kept her smile in place. "My mother died when I was young, Your Grace. Helen, Mrs. Pike, has been a mother to me. I am fortunate to have her." "Fortunate indeed," Alaric had replied, sipping his wine. "She has managed your affairs, and your inheritance, quite skillfully, I am told." Her fork had paused, just for a second. "She is a very capable woman." He knew he was unnerving her. It was a small, grim satisfaction. But it was not a plan. On the Friday before the wedding, just 6 days away, Mr. Shaw arrived. He looked pale and had brought 2 large, locked deed boxes. He dismissed his clerk and waited until Alaric's study door was firmly shut. "Your Grace," Shaw began, his voice low, "what you asked me to do, it has uncovered a matter of profound gravity." "Start with Beaufort," Alaric said, standing by the fireplace. Shaw unlocked the first box. It was filled with ledgers and letters. "It is as the Dowager Duchess implied, but worse. Your father and Thomas Beaufort were equal partners, but your father used a series of shell companies, which, I might add, are technically illegal, to leverage Beaufort's shares against a fictitious debt. He then called in that debt, bankrupting Mr. Beaufort and seizing his patents for the new steel forging process. The process that funded this house," Alaric said, his voice dead. "Indeed, Your Grace, it is the foundation of the modern Whitfield fortune. But it was, in legal terms, grand theft. Beaufort challenged him. Your father's legal team, of which I was a very junior member, I regret to say, buried him in litigation. We had proof of Beaufort's incompetence, forged letters, falsified cargo reports. It was a monstrous deception." Shaw handed him a letter. It was the last one Thomas Beaufort wrote, addressed to Alaric's father. It was not a suicide note, but a curse. "You have taken my name, my work, and my future. You have left my wife and child with nothing. But a name, Whitfield, built on such rotten foundations cannot stand. May your son's son reap the harvest you have sown today." Alaric folded the letter. His hands were steady now. The trembling had been replaced by a block of ice in his stomach. And his family? The wife and daughter? The wife, Alice Beaufort, died of consumption within 6 months of his death. The daughter, Annalise Beaufort, aged 10, was placed in a girls' orphanage in Yorkshire. She ran away 2 years later. The trail goes cold. She simply vanished. Until, I suspect, now. "Yes," Alaric said. "Until now. What of the Suttons?" Shaw opened the second box. "This, Your Grace, is the true calamity. Lady Genevieve Sutton is real." "What?" "The real Lady Genevieve Sutton, daughter of the late Baron Sutton, is currently a resident at the Clinique de Repos in Chartres, France, a private sanitarium. She has been there for 4 years. She suffers from a profound, nervous melancholy. She barely speaks. She sees no one. "Who put her there?" Alaric whispered, though he already knew the answer. "Her distant cousin and legal guardian," Shaw said, his face grim. "A Mrs. Helen Pike. Mrs. Pike has full control of the Sutton estate and the girl's inheritance, which she uses to pay the clinic's exorbitant fees. The girl is, for all intents and purposes, a prisoner." Alaric finally sat down. The sheer, diabolical brilliance of the plan was breathtaking. Annalise Beaufort, the vanished orphan, had somehow teamed up with Helen Pike, the disgraced governess. Shaw had confirmed Pike was a former governess, not an aunt. They had found a perfect vessel, a real, documented, wealthy noblewoman who was conveniently hidden from the world. Annalise had become Genevieve Sutton. She had the name, the money, and the access. And she had brought her hatred, polished and perfected, to his doorstep. "She's not just an imposter, Shaw," Alaric said. "She's a usurper. She has stolen a woman's life to destroy mine." "Your Grace, the wedding is next Saturday," Shaw said, his voice trembling. "We must go to the authorities. We can have her arrested. Conspiracy, fraud, kidnapping." "No." Shaw stared. "No. But Your Grace." "If we go to the authorities," Alaric said, thinking aloud, "the entire story comes out. The Sutton story, the Beaufort story, my father's crimes, my engagement to a fraud. The Whitfield name will not survive it. We will be torn apart by the press and by our peers." "But the alternative? To marry her?" "The alternative," Alaric said, standing up, "is that I handle this privately." He looked at the evidence, the forged letters, the story of the real Genevieve, the suicide note. Annalise Beaufort thought she was coming to destroy a villain, but the villain she was hunting was dead. She was hunting the ghost of his father. And in his place, she found him, a man just as trapped as she was. "Shaw," Alaric said, his voice resolved. "Your work is done. You will not speak of this to anyone, not even your wife, not even your priest. You will attend the wedding, and you will smile, and you will wish us happy." "And what will you do, Your Grace?" Alaric looked at the fireplace, at the flames consuming the log. "Atonement, Mr. Shaw. It seems Miss Beaufort is demanding a debt be paid. I am going to pay it, but in my own currency." He now had the truth. It was a weapon. But it was a weapon that cut both ways. He could destroy her, but it would mean destroying himself. Or he could harness her. This woman, this Annalise, was brilliant. She was driven. She was ruthless. She was, he realized with a sickening jolt, the female image of his own father. But she was driven by a just rage. He was the Duke. He had the power. She had the motive. A new, terrifying plan began to form in his mind. A plan that did not end with her ruin, but with something else entirely. First, however, this new plan would mean allowing the wedding to proceed. He would stand at the altar before God and society, and he would lie. He would commit his life to a woman who despised him, knowing her name was a fiction and her every vow a perjury. Annalise felt the walls closing in. The wedding was 2 days away. Her wedding dress, a mountain of Brussels lace and silk, hung in her wardrobe like a beautiful shroud. This was the culmination of her life's work. This was the moment of victory. So why did she feel sick with dread? It was him, the Duke. Her plan had been simple. Marry the dull, arrogant heir, gain his trust, and then systematically bleed his family dry. She would use her position as Duchess to funnel his wealth to the charities her father had supported. She would find the other families his father had ruined and make them whole. and she would expose the corruption at the heart of the Whitfield name, leaving Alaric in the same debtor's prison her father had died to avoid. The plan was good. The target, however, was not cooperating. Alaric Whitfield was not dull. He was quiet, yes, but his silence was not empty. It was weighted. He was not arrogant. He was burdened. He managed his estates with a precision she, as a student of figures, had to respect. He was honorable in his dealings with his tenants. He was, she hated to admit, nothing like his father. A week ago, she had visited a tenant farm on the edge of the London property, a visit arranged to show the ton her charitable nature. She'd found a family, the McGinleys, about to be evicted. Their patriarch, Mr. Patrick McGinley, was ill, and they were behind on the rent. Annalise had been prepared to generously pay their debt herself, a public display of largesse. But when she'd arrived, Alaric was already there. Not in his carriage, but on horseback, his coat splattered with mud. He was inside the cottage, speaking not with the bailiff, but with the doctor. She had stood in the doorway, unseen. "It's the water in the east pasture," Alaric was saying to his estate manager. "It's fouling the well. I want a new well dug by the end of the week. And the McGinleys are not to be charged rent until Mr. McGinley is back on his feet. Send food from the house kitchen." "Yes, Your Grace," the manager had said. "And," Alaric had added, his voice low, "I want you to review the accounts of my father's tenants for the last 10 years. Any evictions that occurred due to sudden rent increases are to be reviewed. Personally. By me." Annalise had slipped away, her heart hammering. That was not the act of a tyrant. It was the act of a just man. Her resolve, so ironclad for 15 years, was developing a hairline fracture. "He's playing a part," she whispered to herself in her room. "He's trying to charm me. He knows I am a Sutton. He wants my land." But she knew, deep down, that wasn't it. He had been like that, she'd heard, since he'd taken the title. Mrs. Pike saw her hesitation. "You are weakening," the older woman hissed that night, her face a mask of disappointment. "I am not," Annalise snapped. "I am reconsidering the approach." "There is no approach, Annalise. There is only the plan, the one we made over your father's grave. Have you forgotten him? Have you forgotten the sound of the bailiffs at the door? The smell of the orphanage?" "That boy," she spat, "sleeps in a bed bought with your father's blood." "I have forgotten nothing," Annalise cried, the old pain flaring. "Good. Then you will walk down that aisle, you will smile at him, and you will remember that every kind word he speaks is a lie. He is a Whitfield. There is no such thing as an honest one." Annalise firmed her spine. Mrs. Pike was right. The Duke's small kindnesses were a trap. They were a luxury she could not afford. Her father's ghost demanded this. She was Annalise Beaufort, and she would have her vengeance. And yet, the night before the wedding, they had their rehearsal dinner. It was an intimate, suffocating affair with just the immediate family and Lord Robert Langley. Robert, already deep in his cups, raised a glass. To Alaric, the marble duke finally melts, and to Lady Genevieve, the only woman in London who could have done it. A match made in the solicitor's offices, but we'll call it heaven. Alaric didn't smile. He just looked at Annalise. His gaze was so intense, so heavy, it felt as if he were scanning her very soul. "My future, Robert," Alaric said, his voice quiet, "is not a subject for humour." He turned his gaze to Annalise. "Lady Genevieve, I trust you are prepared for tomorrow. A vow is a sacred thing, not to be entered into lightly, or falsely." Annalise met his stare. "I am fully prepared, Your Grace. I understand the weight of a vow. I assure you, I will give the day, and our union, exactly the gravity it deserves." He held her gaze for a full 10 seconds. It was a silent, brutal negotiation. He knew. She felt the blood drain from her face. He didn't know. How could he know? It was impossible. She was just being paranoid. Her guilt was making her see specters. But as he looked away, a small, cold smile touched his lips. It was not a smile of happiness. It was a smile of anticipation, like a predator that has finally cornered its prey. Annalise went to bed that night, not as a triumphant avenger, but as a soldier heading into a battle. She suddenly, terrifyingly, feared she might lose. The wedding day dawned grey and oppressive. St. George's, Hanover Square, was filled to capacity. The ton had turned out in force to see the union of the season. Annalise felt as though she were moving through water. Mrs. Pike fastened the veil over her face. "This is it, my girl," she whispered, her eyes gleaming. "Today you become the Duchess of Whitfield." Annalise just nodded, her throat too tight to speak. She walked down the aisle on the arm of a distant Sutton cousin, her steps even and measured. The organ thundered. She saw Alaric waiting at the altar. He was not looking at her. He was staring at the stained glass window above, his face pale and set. She reached his side. He turned to her. His eyes were not the eyes of a groom. They were the eyes of a judge. They recited their vows. The words, so beautiful and profound, felt like acid in her mouth. "I, Alaric, take thee, Genevieve." He paused, just for a heartbeat. The pause was so small, no one else noticed. But she did. He was letting her know. He was saying the false name on purpose. "Or to be my wedded wife." When it was her turn, her voice did not shake. She was, above all, a performer. "I, Genevieve, take thee, Alaric, to be my wedded husband." She was Annalise Beaufort, and she was committing perjury before God. The Archbishop pronounced them man and wife. "You may kiss your bride." Alaric turned to her. He lifted her veil. His expression was unreadable. He leaned in, and his lips brushed her cheek, not her mouth. It was a gesture of profound, public rejection. To the crowd, it looked like a chaste kiss. To her, it was a slap. The reception was a blur. The champagne, the food, the endless congratulations. Finally, hours later, they were in the Duke's heavy, armoured carriage, rattling through the dark countryside toward the Whitfield ancestral estate, Highclere. They did not speak for 2 hours. Annalise sat on her side, her hands clenched in her lap. Alaric sat opposite her, staring out the window at the passing darkness. "You played your part well today, my lady," he said, the silence breaking. "As did you, your grace," she replied. "I find," he said, "that I have a newfound appreciation for the theatre." They arrived at Highclere. The servants were lined up, curtsying and bowing. Alaric dismissed them curtly. "Her Grace and I are tired. We will not need anything tonight." A maid showed Annalise to the bridal suite. It was a vast, oppressive room, dominated by a 4-poster bed. The maid helped her out of her wedding dress and into a simple, modest nightgown. She was left alone, her hair brushed out, her heart pounding a sick rhythm against her ribs. She waited. 1 hour. 2. Just as she was beginning to think he would not come, the door opened. Alaric stood there. He was no longer in his wedding suit. He was in a simple dark dressing gown, his shirt unbuttoned at the neck. He looked tired and infinitely dangerous. He walked to the fireplace, not looking at her. He picked up a poker and jabbed at the glowing embers. "So," he said, his voice quiet, "the performance is over. We are alone. The guests are gone. The masks can come off. I don't know what you mean, she whispered, her hands pulling the covers to her chin. He laughed, a short, bitter sound. Don't you? After all this time? After all that brilliant planning? He turned to face her. The game is over, Annalise. Her world stopped. He said the name. He said it. Annalise Beaufort, he repeated, savouring the syllables. Daughter of Thomas and Alice Beaufort, born 1860, vanished from the St. Swithin's orphanage in 1872, reappeared in Paris, 1878, as the companion to a Mrs. Helen Pike, who had just secured legal guardianship over her melancholy cousin, Genevieve Sutton. Annalise couldn't breathe. She was completely and totally exposed. How? You are brilliant, Annalise, truly. But you are not the only one who can hire a solicitor. He walked toward the bed. He was not menacing, but his sadness was more terrifying than any rage. You came here to destroy me, he stated. She finally found her voice. The terror was being replaced by the hot, familiar fire of her rage. She had been caught, but she would not be shamed. She threw back the covers and stood, facing him. Yes, to ruin my family, to dismantle my life, all for a man you barely knew. He was my father, she screamed, the word tearing from her throat. He was my father, and your father murdered him. He stole his work, his life, his name. He left my mother to die in a one-room tenement. He left me to freeze and starve in an orphanage. You stand here in your silk dressing gown, in your palace, on land paid for with my blood. And you dare judge me. She was weeping now, hot, angry tears she hadn't shed in 15 years. The dam of her control had broken. Yes, she sobbed. I came to destroy you. I came to see you ruined. It is the only thing I have lived for. It is the only thing that has kept me alive. My only regret. She looked at him, her eyes burning, is that I was caught before I could finish. He stood there, unflinching, and let her rage wash over him. He had expected this. When she was finished, panting and trembling, he didn't shout. He didn't call for the guards. He just nodded. I see. He walked to a writing desk and picked up a sheaf of papers. He threw them on the bed. Then you should see this. She picked up the top paper. It was a letter. She recognized the handwriting. It was her father's. The letter to the old Duke. May your son's son reap the harvest. I know all of it, Annalise, Alaric said, his voice rough. I know about the forged manifests. I know about the stolen patents. I know he was a thief. And I know he was responsible for your father's death. Annalise stared at him, bewildered. This was not the confession she had expected. You admit it? I admit the truth. It is a heavier burden than you can possibly imagine. He sank into a chair, the marble Duke completely gone. In his place was a man who looked broken. My entire life, he said, has been a lie. I have been upholding a legacy that is rotten to its core. I have been honoring a monster. I knew he was ruthless, but I did not know. I did not know the depths of it. Not until you. He looked up at her, and his grey eyes were filled with a profound, agonizing emptiness. You came here to destroy a villain, Annalise. But that villain is dead. There is no one left in this house but me, a man who has just as much reason to hate my father as you do. Annalise stood, shaking the letters in her hand. Her plan, her life's work. It had been built on the assumption that her enemy was Alaric. But he was. What happens now? She whispered. Do you have me arrested? Arrested? He looked at her. I have just committed a felony by marrying you. I am an accomplice to your fraud. We are bound, Annalise, not by love or by law, but by the sins of our fathers." He stood up. "You came here seeking justice. You sought it through revenge. You were right about the crime, but you were wrong about the man. And you were wrong about the solution." He took a step closer. "Your plan to destroy me? It stops now." "You can't stop me," she said, a flicker of her old defiance returning. "I don't have to," he said. "I'm going to offer you something better. Something real." Annalise stared at him, her mind reeling. "Better? What is better than justice?" "Revenge is not justice, Annalise," Alaric said, his voice gaining strength. "Revenge is just more pain. It's a fire that consumes everyone, including the person who lit it. You want to destroy the Whitfield name? Fine, do it. But you'll destroy the livelihoods of the 5,000 people who work for the Whitfield estates. You'll beggar the tenants, like the McGinleys who rely on me. You'll destroy me, a man who has done you no wrong. And at the end of it, will it bring your father back? Will it make the last 15 years of your life any less agonizing?" She had no answer. "I have been trying," he continued, pacing the room, "for the 3 years since I inherited this title, to untangle the mess my father left, to make quiet reparations, to run this estate with the honor he never had. But I am one man, working in the dark. His network is vast. His old partners are still in power, and they are like jackals, all with their hooks in his and my legacy." He stopped and looked at her. His eyes were clear and sharp. "You, Annalise, have something I've never had. You have a motive that is pure. And you have done more research into my father's crimes in the past 5 years than I could have done in a lifetime. You came here to be my destroyer. I am asking you to be my partner." She gaped at him. "A partner? A partner, a true one, not a marriage of love. God knows that is impossible, but a marriage of purpose. We are bound, husband and wife. Let us use it. Let us work." "Work? At what?" "At dismantling my father's legacy, at finding the rest of the men he colluded with, at exposing them. You wanted to ruin the men who killed your father? Well, he wasn't alone. There is Lord Compton, who still sits on my board. There is the law firm of Dawlish and Crew, who forged the documents. They are all still profiting. Your plan was to burn the house down. I am offering you a chance to cleanse it, to rebuild it." This was not what she had planned. Her plan was fire and ruin. His was construction. It was harder, more complex. "You want me to help you? Save the Whitfield name?" She scoffed. "No," he said, stepping closer. "I want you to help me change it, to make it mean something other than theft. Help me, Annalise. Help me restore the Beaufort name. Help me find the other families. We can use my power and your knowledge. Together, we can actually achieve the justice you've been dreaming of." He held out his hand. She looked at his hand, then at his face. This was a man she had planned to ruin, a man she had despised, and he was offering her everything she wanted, not wrapped in revenge, but in redemption. And Helen Pike?" she asked, her voice small. "And the real Genevieve Sutton? Mr. Shaw is already arranging for an anonymous benefactor to fund the best care in Switzerland for Miss Sutton. She will be moved from that prison in Chartres. As for Mrs. Pike, she will be given a generous retirement and sent somewhere very, very far away. She has committed a crime, but she was your only ally. I will not have her prosecuted, on one condition, that you never see or speak to her again. He was offering a full, clean slate. He had thought of everything. "Why?" she whispered. "Why would you do this? Why not just have me thrown in prison?" "Because," Alaric said, his voice dropping, "you were right. This house is built on your father's blood. I live with that. It is my sin to bear. Perhaps this is my penance." She looked at his outstretched hand. To take it was to abandon 15 years of rage. It was to abandon the ghost of her father, who had demanded vengeance. But as she looked at Alaric, she didn't see the son of her enemy. She saw another victim, a man like her, haunted by the past. Slowly, her fingers trembling, she placed her hand in his. His grip was strong and warm. It was the first time they had truly touched. "All right, Duke," she said, her voice hoarse. "We have a partnership." He nodded, a flicker of relief in his eyes. "But," she said, pulling her hand back, this marriage, it is a partnership only. This room, the bed, that is not part of the bargain." Alaric looked at the great four-poster bed, then back at her. "Annalise, Duchess, I have no interest in forcing a union. My own rooms are down the hall. This chamber is yours. We will be husband and wife to the world. But in private we will be allies." He bowed, a formal, respectful gesture. "Now, we have work to do. I suggest you get some sleep. Our war against them begins tomorrow." He turned and left the room, closing the door softly behind him. Annalise stood alone in the vast room, her entire world rearranged. She had come to Highclere as an avenger. She was, instead, its new mistress, and she had a war to win. The next 6 months were the most grueling and the most alive either of them had ever been. The marriage of the Duke and Duchess of Whitfield became the strangest, most talked-about subject in London. They were inseparable. But they were not the picture of romance. They were a team. They were seen at balls, but they would spend their time in corners, speaking not with socialites, but with bankers, industrialists and politicians. They were seen in the park, but they were not riding. They were walking, deep in conversation, stacks of papers passing between them. The marble Duke had found his Iron Duchess. Their nights were spent not in the ballroom or the bedroom, but in Alaric's study. The room became their war room. The walls were covered in maps of shipping lanes, diagrams of corporate structures, and lists of names. "Compton is the key," Annalise said, late one night. She was perched on the edge of the desk, a ledger open on her lap. She had shed her elaborate gowns for simple, practical dresses. "He was your father's right hand. He controls the shares in the Indian shipping line." "The one that was my father's?" "He's slippery," Alaric said, staring into the fire. "He's insulated himself. Legally, he's clean." "Then we don't get him legally," Annalise said. Her eyes had a spark he had come to admire. "We get him socially." The plan was simple and brutal. Alaric and Annalise would host the grandest ball of the season, and they would use it to expose Lord Compton. They spent weeks laying the groundwork. Alaric used his power as Duke to call in favors, to subpoena old records. Annalise used her meticulous mind to cross-reference them, finding the single thread that connected Compton to the forged manifests from 1865. They found their smoking gun, a letter in Compton's own hand authorizing the payment to the forger. The night of the ball, Whitfield House was ablaze once more. But this time, Alaric did not feel like he was suffocating. He stood at the top of the stairs, and at his side was Annalise, his wife, his Duchess, his partner. He was terrified to put a name to it. He respected her. He admired her. Her mind was like a diamond, brilliant and hard, and in the past months, as the rage had slowly given way to purpose, he had seen a wit in her, a warmth she had kept buried. He found himself wanting her. Lord Compton arrived, a portly, jovial man with a predatory smile. "Your Grace! Duchess! A triumph!" "Lord Compton," Alaric said, his voice clear and carrying. "We were just discussing you." "All good things, I hope?" He laughed. "We were discussing," Annalise said, stepping forward. "Old business. Specifically, the Beaufort partnership." Compton's smile faltered. The music seemed to dim. I beg your pardon? That is ancient history." "Not all history stays buried," Alaric said. He held up a single piece of paper. "The letter. We were admiring your handwriting. So distinctive." Compton went white. He knew what it was. "You, sir," Alaric announced, his voice ringing through the silent ballroom, "are a thief and a conspirator. You colluded with my father to defraud Thomas Beaufort. You, sir, are not welcome in my house." The Tun gasped. This was not a private word. This was a public execution. "How dare you?" Compton sputtered. You have no proof. You will be ruined for this." "I have this," Alaric said, holding the letter aloft. "And I have the accounts. And I have the testimony of the man you paid to forge the documents, who Mr. Shaw located in debtor's prison." He looked around the room. "My father, the late Duke, was a criminal. He stole the fortune that built this house. He did so with the help of this man, Lord Compton. That ends tonight. He was sacrificing his family's good name. He was telling the world the truth. He was burning his own reputation to the ground, and he had never felt so free. Compton, utterly destroyed, fled the ballroom. Alaric turned to the stunned crowd. The Whitfield name will, from this day, be associated with truth. My wife and I, he looked at Annalise, will be liquidating the assets acquired through fraud. The full Beaufort estate is to be restored to its rightful heir. He turned to Annalise. To my wife, Annalise Beaufort, the Duchess of Whitfield. He had given her back her name, in public. She looked at him, her eyes shining with unshed tears. It was not the victory she had planned. It was so much more. Months later, the scandal had been immense, but they had weathered it. The Whitfield name, though tarnished, was also respected. Alaric and Annalise had made good on their promise. The Beaufort name was restored. The other families had been compensated. They stood in the study. The maps were gone. The ledgers were closed. The work was done. "Well," Annalise said, her voice quiet, "it is finished." "Yes," Alaric said. "My name is my own again. The debt is paid." She looked at him. "Our partnership is concluded. I am free to go, I suppose." Alaric's heart stopped. "Free to go? After all this?" He turned to her. The marble duke was long gone. "The first time I saw you, no, the first time I overheard you, behind that pillar, I was undone. I thought it was by your lie." He took a step toward her. "I have been undone a second time, Annalise. But this time, it is by your truth, by your passion, by your brilliance, by your honor." He took her hands. "You are free to go. Annalise Beaufort is free to go." "But," he said, his voice thick with an emotion he had never known, "I am begging the Duchess of Whitfield to stay. I married an impostor seeking revenge. I find I am desperately in love with the woman who gave me redemption. If she will have me." Annalise looked into his eyes, the grey eyes that were no longer cold, but warm with a terrifying vulnerability. "Alaric," she whispered, the first time she had ever used his name. I came to this house to find a villain. But I found you." She raised her hand, and for the first time touched his face. "I think," she said, a small, real smile finally gracing her lips, "that I will stay." He did not kiss her cheek this time. He kissed her, a kiss not of duty or of war, but of a profound, hard-won, and very real love. The debt was paid, and in its place, a new, priceless account had begun. And so, the Duke and his Duchess, two people brought together by a lie, found their truth in the ashes of the past. They proved that a legacy is not what you inherit, but what you build. The whispers that undid the Duke were not an end, but a violent, necessary beginning. What did you think of Alaric and Annalise's story? Their journey from enemies to allies, and finally to partners in every sense of the word, shows that the deepest love can often grow from the rockiest soil. If you were captivated by their drama, their tension, and their ultimate redemption, please like this video. Subscribe to the channel for more historical dramas with twists you won't see coming. And share this story with someone else who loves a tale of secrets and justice. Most importantly, leave a comment below. What was your favorite moment? Did you suspect the twist Alaric would take? Let me know, and I'll see you in the next story.